Hi, everyone. September 29th. Welcome to 30 Minutes with Spyglass Lending. We have an incredible guest for you today. Of course, as always, as usual, but this one in particular, I'm very excited about it. Michael Leis, he's a marketing strategist and human behavioralist, and he's going to tell us a lot about real estate today. We're going to dovetail into that. We're going to talk a lot about how that's going to apply and what he could teach us, because it's a lot. Trust me on that. Michael, thank you for joining us. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Aaron. It's my pleasure to be here. And yeah, I'm the Managing Director, Senior Vice President at Eversana InTouch, and happy to lend a hand to you and your audience and what perspective I can lend based on my experience.
I greatly appreciate that, and we're going to get into it. But before we do, there is a gentleman soaring behind you, many feet in the air. It looks like it's a signed poster that tells us a lot about where you're from. Who is that? That's Dr. J, of course.
Yes, of
right?
course.
And you're a Philly man, right? Tried and true.
I am a Philly man, and yes, that one of the reasons why I love that poster in particular is because it was the first ad that got put out after Dr. J got bought. So Nets, New York or Brooklyn Nets were at one time the New Jersey Nets in the ABA. It was not easy to stay afloat in the NBA as you're getting absorbed into the NBA. And so they sold Dr. J to the Sixers for $6 million, which is why they put that number on his jersey. It was an unbelievable number at that time. So they put out this poster, and what you can't see on this is that his uniform, socks, and shoes are painted. So it's an artist's rendition of, so this is actually a shot of him at Nassau County Coliseum doing this layout, and they painted over a Sixers jersey on top of him, because this is like pre-Photoshop to get it out to print in time. And so nobody's ever worn this jersey. This jersey only exists in this ad.
So this is very cool, because obviously I'm sure you're a fan, but more specifically, you're a fan of the marketing and advertising space where you're from. That's cool. That is, I mean, hey, you talk about an allegiance to your business, and if that doesn't tell you who we're talking to, I don't know what does. But specifically, and you mentioned it obviously in the title of your job, you are a strategist. Let's talk about that a little bit, because that is a really interesting term, and I think one that a lot of people don't know even exists. What does a strategist do?
Yeah. So what a strategist does is really understand, what's the business trying to achieve, and then really simply is like, how does the market translate the value of what that business has to provide to a marketplace, and then what we try to understand is who are the people that this business needs to unlock that opportunity or that growth, and then what do these people need to be able to do that, right? To achieve it. Not so a business has objectives. How do people actually take actions to achieve those objectives in ways that meet a shared goal?
Yeah, and I mentioned at the beginning, you're a behavioralist, right? I mean, that is such a big key component, of course, of marketing to anybody, or to strategize for any business, your own or a larger corporation, right? Is understanding human behavior, what's going on the other end. And so much of that, I can imagine, has come out in the last, call it 10, 15 years with the advance of social media, right? I mean, that has got to be a field that is just lighting up forever for someone like yourself.
Yeah, and it started, in e-commerce. So working in e-commerce at the beginning was really about how would somebody think through a purchase decision when we've never done this in digital before. So suddenly things that seem like they're second nature when you go and make decisions about products, like the difference between a treadmill and a golf club. How would you make those decisions? What kinds of people would you need to make them? Because they're expensive. And how would you navigate to that? Like, how would you create a navigation scheme for one golf club? Or how would you create a navigation scheme for a pair of shoes, right? Those are actually like really complex digital environments. And it was at that time that we were working in e-commerce that we're like, oh my gosh, if we could help people facilitate this decision-making process, then we wouldn't just be waiting at the end in e-commerce and just being in the right price at the right time. And then when social media and the portable web started to emerge, it's really exciting because you can design not just for the transaction, but design for how people make decisions, right? So social media is a lot like screenwriting in that it's not how people really talk, it's not how people really act, but it is how people mediate their identity and how they want to be seen by the people that are most important to them. And that's really valuable in understanding how businesses need to appear to those people to align to their existing attitudes, and then also the ways that people how to make it easier, right? How to take less time, cost less money, have less physical effort, have less cognitive, less thinking effort in order to do the things. And again, it's like the shared goal. How do we meet an audience in a place where we're understanding when they are motivated, so that we're making it easy and relatable to them to take an action at that point in time.
Yeah, and that's fascinating stuff. To some end, and what you do, the positive side of social media, because obviously you're focused and getting to people, to exactly what they want and making their lives easier. Call it what it is, in essentially, if they're a consumer, right? If they're
Right.
and essentially getting what they need or whatever else they might be into, and it's just the path of least resistance. But of course, we know there's a dark side to all of that.
Well, yeah, and really, the dark side is a great place to learn, right? Because the truth is that really small audiences can disrupt really large networks if they're coordinated, and they take an approach that is about aligning to existing attitudes and then providing a specific behavioral next step. So a lot of times when we think about these like terrible bad actors, whether it's anti-vax or whether it's ISIS, like these are very small groups of people that are able to seem bigger because of the fact that they are very aligned in the way they tell a story, and they give people practical ways to share that story to strengthen relationships with each other, which is really what decision making is. Like
Right.
nobody makes, and this is a big transition from advertising that we're still going through, is the idea that people are sole decision makers. And that if we just advertise to one person enough, eventually that decision will happen. But we know from our own lives, like there's no decision. No one makes a decision alone.
Right. No one makes that decision alone. And sadly, what you're talking about obviously is misinformation is such a huge part of that, right? That's the age we live in now. And it's appealing. It's attractive, sadly, for a number of reasons, it feels like, but specifically because, hey, you've been told one thing over and over again, or, hey, live by the rules and all that, be inside. And then now all of a sudden it's almost fun to be a contrarian thinker. And when all of a sudden you see something that is, outside the box, whatever, like we're told, think outside the box. Well, now people are thinking outside the box with misinformation, and it leads us to some dark places. But hold on.
Right. They're just exploiting the systems that exist, and the systems are not adapting to the way they're being exploited. So that's
right, of course. And these bad actors are able to seep through, obviously, unfortunately, because of the platforms and because it's, it's for everybody. And then, the notion of free speech, a much larger conversation. We'll circle back to it for a second, because I want to take us back to the time and place where you started. I mean, you specifically in e-commerce. What year? Paint a picture for us.
Holy smoke, that was the beginning. That was 98 or 99.
Right. So I mean, you're only talking 5 years after the the internet had come onto the scene. So you're right there, right at the beginning.
It was just after the dawning of the visual web, and was super lucky to get hired into a place called GSI Commerce that got bought by eBay. We were facing funny problems at that time, which was like, how do you show products like this? How do you show sporting goods products on the internet? What does a brand mean? How do you have one fulfillment warehouse and then a content management system that flows information depending on attitudes, right? The reason why you would shop at a Sport Chalet versus a Dick's Sporting Goods versus an Athlete's Foot are three different kinds of people and three different kinds of shopping occasions and different ways that you would navigate that purchase path. So we really leaned back on screenplay writing and story to try to like understand like the patterns of how people would make decisions, and then to try to design information architecture and user experience to work with the technology and to work with the way people think through these kinds of actions. So it's funny, to think that we had to have a whole redesign because our sites were built for 56.6 modems, and everybody who was using the sites was at 48.8, and they couldn't. That was our first bit, and that's the kinds of problems we used to solve then. Is like people can't load the site, or people can't navigate out of checkout, right? Like we don't think about that at all anymore. That the idea that we came to called funneling, which is like reduce it. When do you reduce choice in the process, so that by the time you get to checkout, there's really only go all the way back or check out. Like those things came painfully because we needed to keep our jobs. Like that was important.
I can imagine.
Selling stuff
and getting them to click that button, certainly. And you do it. But you started e-commerce. I mean, what was the next step after that? Where'd you land?
After that was the very first pure play banking play called Wingspan Bank. So that was a little bit too early for the technology at its time. It was a bank in which it was just before direct deposit. So you would actually get your paycheck and you'd have to mail it into the bank. And you'd have to wait the 3 days for the bank to receive your check, and then another, I think it was 2 or 3 days for the check to clear. So it was difficult. You'd have to be in a position where this is like the extra bank account. And so that was funny. And then
it's amazing that this was a life, right? That we all lived for so long. It's like I love the way you describe it. That was difficult. That was right. Just to think about it was like, man, that sounds difficult.
Yeah, and it was really difficult for the bank because they would give away like these crazy. Think about an APR on a checking account.
Yeah.
And so then you can't afford your customers anymore. So we had to get rid of a third of the customer. It was just a super bizarre time.
Right. But it seemed to be a time, though, as you mentioned, everybody was kind of figuring this thing out. You're troubleshooting the troubleshoot, and
exactly.
That was what was going on back
How
then.
do you scale a banking business when everybody has to mail in their checks?
Right. That's exactly. Well, obviously, it sounds like they didn't. But who's next? Where'd you land after that?
Well, then I ended up actually in screen printing, embroidery, and distribution. So from the mills to the screen printers and embroiderers around the country. So that was a great B2B, large scale kind of B2B enterprise experience. Again, just at the dawning of the web. How do you convert what was really a heavy sales process and a relationship-based process into the web without commoditizing your brand value as a distributor to a ton of small businesses, right? And from there, started to work in different agency environments, and so started to get. That's when the portable web started to happen. So started to work in desktop applications for clients like Visa and getting a look into other cultures and other countries. So what's the difference between, developing a desktop application in the U.S. versus Singapore versus Korea? Very different cultures around money, very different cultures around credit, and just how people think through computing at that time was very different. And then got to work on the Plastics Make It Possible stuff and innovations, and really learned in PR how to manage discourse with content, which was just burgeoning at that time in the mid 2000s. And then
let's unpack that for a second. Managing discourse with content. Let's delve into that for a quick second.
Sure.
Love that terminology. Tell us a little bit more about exactly what you were doing there.
So especially in high risk dynamics or brands that have high risk, a lot of times, and I deal with this all the time in healthcare now, is like the idea is to like do less or have more control over less content. But the truth is that when people search for information, it's you're never going to eliminate or restrict the other voices in your marketplace, but you can actually invest in gaining a stronger, a larger voice that aligns with the perspectives of the people and in the cultures of your audience. So in plastics innovation, right, it's a thing that immediately when I say plastics innovation, you're going to think that this is really terrible and all kinds of bad things come to mind. But there is a place to talk about the value of cars being lighter than ever, or the value of the protective value in sports equipment that can now be fabricated in ways that it never could be before. And so but again, it's really investing in providing additional viewpoints that help people understand a topic that they wouldn't have understood before, and create and drive a conversation that maybe didn't exist before.
Yeah, and that's always important, right? I mean, that's such a big thing. That term, just the notion of discourse, especially in this country, and think about obviously what our last 5, 7, 8 years look like, and unfortunately, discourse has gotten nasty. And here we are trying to troubleshoot that.
And where is the discourse, and where isn't it? So, I mean, now I work exclusively in healthcare, and the healthcare discourse in our culture is non-existent. It's really over generations. Like, we all like to think about how awesome our healthcare is, but in practice, it's been missing from most of the people in this country for generations. And so what's happened in its place—
When you say it's been missing, you tell me what you mean specifically by that.
Well care, just thinking about the doctor as a thing that you do on a regular basis, and not something that you do in case of extreme intervention when something's really wrong.
Why has it become that way, by the way? Is it the expense?
Yeah, absolutely. Expense and access. It's more expensive. When you look at where our big costs go, which is like healthcare and higher ed, like those are two major, like, they've priced everybody out of the market, whether you wanted to become a doctor or you wanted to get served by one. That thing is out of reach for the large majority of Americans. And when we talk about healthcare being a web, or healthcare being really complicated, that's for people that are engaged in it. The large majority of the country, huge swaths of the country, as we've gone from, think about like doctors' house calls. What was that? Civil War? To local offices, to regional offices, to now we're kind of in the corporate era of super regional care. How many people would have to drive a half a day to see a specialist, or just to see a doctor? One of the great things about working in expanding healthcare centers is really the revelation of how long, decades, people have been without routine dental care, routine health care. And what's happened in that time is it's been acculturated into the myths and to the ways people have to socialize something that doesn't exist. And so what you end up with, and I mean this in a neutral way, is that a lot of healthcare thinking culturally has ended up being highly faith-based, because that's what we're used to socializing around. And so unless you have an illness that is very visible to your family or your friends, you'll often not do anything about it until it requires like a religious level of intervention, right? Like, it's almost like I let this thing go until somebody had to intervene on my behalf. And that is a terrible story, because the outcomes aren't great at that point, and the expenses, 2/3 of all bankruptcies are healthcare related in our country.
I mean, let's pause for a second on that and really just think about that number. 2/3 of the bankruptcies in this country alone are specific to healthcare. How should anybody feel like they should be a doctor? I mean, most people do know, to your point. I mean, the expense is outrageous, and not everybody can understand or even navigate their bill or understand why something is a $63,000 charge, and hopefully you have the right insurance that brings it down 96%,
right,
and what you're fighting for and all of this. And something that's always fascinated me, and I've given a lot of thought to in the past couple of years, especially now with 3 children, is this notion, this still, like, in the fabric of this country, notion that our healthcare should somehow still be tied to our employment. I mean, why is it that our employers, I mean, and most people don't know this, that you're going back over 8 decades as to why this all even became a thing. And I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole, but like, it goes back to to FDR's administration ultimately, and something that he put into place. A lot of people don't know this, and maybe you do certainly, but ultimately why, the employers then had to incentivize to give healthcare. And then, for the longest time, that kind of made sense when it was the type of country that it was through the 40s, the 50s, and ultimately in the 60s. But when America went in a big different direction, it was like, why are we still and really pushing for this? Why are we just pushing like this is some great incentive, like healthcare should come with employment? And now look where we are and look what it's created.
Well, it's not dissimilar to the discussion we were just having about ineffective regulation and technology, right? Is like when you don't have effective regulation and then you have bad actors that can exploit a system for its lack of adaptation, is the same thing that happens. So FDR rolls out healthcare at a time when there's 70% tax bracket against people that are millionaires and billionaires, and that tax has gone away, but the structure hasn't. The structure hasn't adapted, and it creates
and the wages haven't adapted, right? I mean, and ultimately, if you have that minimum wage, that notion, and we're all just hearing the fight go on for the past couple of years just to get it up to $15, right? I mean, and even still, it's like, well, if we bump that, then hey, we can't cover your health care, So that's always been the fight, and why it's been kept. It's insane, but there we are, still tying it to our employment, which again, larger conversation about putting on the government.
But you go to any other. You go to any other country, and there's just like a really vibrant, especially in advertising or marketing, really vibrant ability to onboard and work with people who are freelancers, because you can freelance. You can do as much work as you personally need to, or you could start a business, because you don't have to think about what's going to manage your healthcare. But on the unlucky side of it is the people that believe in the myth of a certain level of work delivering low-cost healthcare to them because of insurance. And the saddest part to me, as we kind of worked with a client who was expanding access to health centers, yes, automatically you think about people that have insurance, and then people that do not, right? And so you're like, okay, well, how do you price for people that do not have insurance? But what we realized in research is there's actually another category of folks, which is folks that have worked their whole lives to get to this level of status in their work in which they get insurance. And then find out just on the other side of gaining insurance, that insurance has a cost that they can't negotiate. And it leaves them in a position where they can't afford the copays for the medical care that they are now, or the medical insurance that they're now paying for. So there's breakage that happens all over the place in this system. And worst of all is we have, and this gets described as by executives as like, we'll let the market decide. But what that trickles down to individually is that it's up to a person, to each individual person, to advocate for their next best step between legacy systems, whether it's the EHR, the pharmacy system, the system that your doctor or your insurer holds, right? And to be able to navigate each one of these systems independently to achieve your own best outcome, and then have costs levied on you at a time at which you are incapable of negotiation. Right. At the very end
times of your life. And it's just daunting even to think about, even when you're healthy prior to all of that. Right. And you think about the time consumption that's involved in it, and the edification of it. And you're just like, no, thanks. Right. And there it just goes right back to what you said. Most of us now are like, how do I stay away from the doctor?
Right. How do I not deal with it?
Seeing my doctor every 6 to 12 months, the check-in and pre-screenings and making sure the systems run right before it goes. Because we take our cars to do that. We change the oil. We still do these things if we have to.
This is one of the great things about digital media today, is that it can give you something that no other part of the healthcare system can, which is, what does good outcomes look like for me? I can't get that from my doctor. I can't get that from my insurance. I could ask a nurse. Maybe they could help. But really being able to connect with other people who are going through this, and it's something I think we all kind of strive for, is to lower this barrier, so that people can safely, and by safely I mean like emotionally safely tell their stories and gain perspective from other people that have gone through it as well, regardless of what the condition is.
Well, I mean, just the fact that you're even bringing it up sounds like that's something that you probably have a great pride for. And I certainly can't speak for you, but this notion of connection, right? I mean, I guess that's for what the love of what you do, right? I mean, this is really what you're able to do. And for those that don't know, I mean, if they go on your LinkedIn page, you have, a 36 point presentation that's on there, behavioral storytelling, right? And some interesting stuff in there. And I was able to take a look at it today, and I'm fascinated by it. I mean, you seem to have like this real affinity for what you do, and you could hear it obviously speaking about it today. But amazing that you've been able to work in so many different industries and bring your knowledge to all of this.
Yeah, just staying curious about what are the ways that people strengthen their connections and their relationships with each other, and what are the objects that they share? How do they do that? How do we become better or closer with each other, right? How do we like kind of build joy into those relationships?
Is it storytelling? I mean, is that really the crux of that brings us to who we are and as humans? I mean, you hear that a lot, right? I mean, how you get those to I mean, what's the notion that after 150 people in your little sphere, it's hard to really have a connection with anybody outside of that. So stories get told, right? And nations get built, and sports teams like the Philadelphia 76ers, find fans for life because you just believe in these stories.
In the stories, and all the stories have the same structure, regardless of what religion you're in or how old they are. We all face the same truths as the story structure that endures, which is like you're just walking around one day in your normal world, and Joseph Campbell says heroes happen by choice or by chance, and all of a sudden you're thrown into a world that you do not understand. But a mentor is there to help you understand and translate the world into what you know, so that you can do the things that all heroes do. They go to a height like Jack and the Beanstalk, or a depth like Jonah and the Whale, or a distance like the girls on Girls Trip. And then through that process, of really finding out who your friends are and going through tests together are about strengthening what's within you to be able to do things that you didn't even know you were capable of until you get to that moment, whether in business it's a transaction, in life it's a point of achievement or a ritual, and you realize that was just the beginning, that what you thought was the prize is actually the beginning of what you really have to do, which is to take what you now know about yourself and the way that you've grown and bring it back as a contribution to the world that you left behind, to get better. And so this is as important in quick serve restaurants and in real estate as it is in healthcare, is the assumption that people know what you know, and that they are really forced to confront an entirely new foreign world to them at the point at which you meet them. And what can you do to help them understand what the path is that they are going to go through, the people that they're going to need along the way, and not just what the transaction is that you're designing for, but what's the outcome that you're designing for? What kinds of things do people get on the other side of that transaction when they have a new home, or when they gain a new health ability, right? Even in some place like oncology, it's not all of the endings are great in oncology. In fact, many of them are not great endings. But the moments on treatment, when you become stronger and you become illuminated, you get to see the world in a different way, and you get to give other people the benefit of that perspective. That's everything. That's literally what we're all shooting for. So understanding our place in this crazy globe.
You summarized that beautifully, and I appreciate that greatly. But you also brought out the key word, real estate, and you mentioned the home and all of that. I think, for what you do, tell us a little bit about how as lenders, as realtors, as even just part of the buy cycle, the buyers and even sellers, what could we all be doing better for ourselves and each other, as we enter this really interesting market? I mean, obviously interest rates have more than doubled in less than a year, and everybody is concerned that the value in their home is going to end up going down. I mean, we all saw this explosion of equity even prior to COVID, and then through COVID, just an insane explosion of equity. And everybody's wondering, because so many people have tied their retirement to primary residence. I mean, that's part everybody else is kind of figuring, well, hey, commerce still needs to go on, right? Even though the rates are going higher again, and there's less demand and still a lot less inventory because the building hasn't quite happened across the country as it needed to. But how do we all move forward, and how can we apply what it is we're talking about today?
Well, geez, the stakes, I mean, have gotten so high now. Money's so much more expensive. And so,
we can start with that. That's a great way to put it. The money is more expensive. Inflation is, it is 8 to 9% more expensive month by month. So
yeah, I mean, anybody that's entering this marketplace is entering in with a ton of more trepidation, right? It's that's another Campbell thing is, the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure that you seek. But as people enter the marketplace, how do you help them understand what it is that they are negotiating or navigating to their own outcomes, right? Like what is possible in this marketplace, and really, and we were talking about this earlier, is like, understanding what's going to maintain your visibility in that marketplace. There's fewer people that are in it, but that's true of any market, right? 95% of the people who are capable of being your customers are not in the market at any given time. Only maybe 5% are. So how do you maintain a way of staying in front of them in the ways that they find valuable, which is totally why real estate agents and brokers forever have sponsored your local Little League team. And they sponsored the scavenger hunt. But those opportunities are important to stay persistent in, so that when someone does actually enter the marketplace, that you're prepared at that point with and they talk about it in process wise within the industry, right? Whether it's your listing presentation or your buyer agency presentation, or what the mortgage process looks like. But what people really need at that point in time is not just understanding the process, but understanding how you are going to help them through to the successful completion of this process, and that you're going to be there because you understand all these terms and you understand all these things, but these are completely foreign. This is a totally special world to someone who may just be stepping into it for this one mortgage or this one. I mean, geez, who's going to refinance? But I was going to say refinance, but who's on the outside of this housing market or this commercial market that is finally at this point primed to enter it? How do they do that with their eyes wide open and feeling confident going through the process?
And then, one question after the next, and all of this kind of breeds new questions. I can ask you forever, but our time is up. And 30 minutes goes quick. But I really appreciate this because I could have you on for hours.
It's such a pleasure.
And this is amazing. I'd love to have you back. Michael Leis, you are, an end-to-end marketer, as mentioned, and a human behavioralist. Certainly a strong suggestion to everybody. Find this man on LinkedIn and read behavioral storytelling, because behavioral storytelling, really eye-opening stuff. And anyone in any business should be looking at that, because it's very important. I mean, if you have a product to sell, if you have a story to tell, if you have something, to figure out, especially in this digital age, and everything is, let's call it like it is, you need to know. And I think you've put it beautifully in that summary. So appreciate you coming on today.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, me. Have a great day, and thanks again.
You too. Thanks for having me on. I hope my perspective helps.
Tremendously. Be well.
All right. Well, take care.